But my wife said, we want to get level ground, easy access, so we can age in homes. So that became something that we built into it early on. So, we've made all, having 920 doors and access has sort of been built in from the start. So, and then, it was just we had some ideas, but I think the designer helped us evolve. We've ended up with a pavilion style house. We probably weren't thinking of that at the start, but it sort of evolved that way. And that's the value, I suppose, of getting a designer in to bring their knowledge and professionalism into that side of it that you can only see within the box, and they look outside the box and analyse your brief and that sort of thing. So that's pretty much where that started.
Well, Michael, I am so glad to have you here sharing your story on the podcast. You've been an incredible Home Method member. You've been one of our most avid researchers. You've really dived into the details of navigating your project journey. You've really committed yourself to the learning and the exploration of applying Home Method to your project, and obviously had some own learnings along the way. And you've always been an incredible member in terms of contributing to the community and providing your feedback and knowledge through what you've been progressing with on your project journey. So, and of course, you and I have had a couple of design review consults together as well. So that's, I've been able to see your project progressing along the time since you joined in 2021. So I'm really looking forward to being able to share your story on the podcast. Can you just start by sharing with us a little bit of information about yourself and your family and who this project is for, and why you decided to build a new home?
My wife and myself farm near Bremer Bay, so I've been there most of my life. And we've got 2 boys at home now. They're 25 and 28, and then we've got 2 daughters. And I'll be approaching 62, so thinking of retirement and transitioning, and a bit of succession planning and keeping in mind the girls and the boys both want to farm. So we've got a lot of planning to do around that. Albany's our nearest regional centre, so we're near Bremer Bay, and that's a beautiful town. And we're lucky that we're only 20 minutes from there, so we get the opportunity to enjoy the coast. And then when you head into Albany, about 10 minutes out of Albany is a region, Calvin, and it's a great spot because things change. There's a river along there, and it's sort of on the way to our major regional centre. And we've been thinking that possibly that'd be a great place, to buy a small property or a house or whatever. And then in the spring of 2020, we'd looked at this particular block. We'd driven in there, and it came on the market, and we put an offer in and ended up with it. It's a residential rural block, and it's on the end of a cul-de-sac. And 2.5 acres or 1 hectare. And we just thought, that'd fit our plans. And then it was, okay, how do we find a design? We didn't have a design or anything, and we just kind of couldn't see anything that got value out of the block. So so that's basically where it started.
And you, it's a great block, and it's in terms of it obviously falls away from the street and looks out to that northeasterly sort of orientation, and I remember looking at the photographs of the outlook and the general location of it, and it was really lovely in terms of its position. You mentioned obviously you couldn't find anything that, that custom approach started to seem like the obvious choice for you. So how did you sort of go in terms of thinking about what you were going to design and how you were going to go about designing it? And where did sort of Undercover Architect and Home Method come into that process as well?
Well, we always wanted, I think my wife and I both wanted something that, made the best of the solar access. I remember when we renovated the house on the farm, and the light coming in from the north. We had, and then we put the veranda on, and we were going to put some polycarbonate on, but we didn't do that. But just the light disappearing and the value of that. So that was really important. We wanted something that gave the best value for that, and there was also a 100-metre offset from the river. So we had a bit of a triangular area in the corner on the entrance to build on. So it was, how do we utilise that area and how do we get the best out of that? The neighbouring block was being built on at the time, and there was a builder who was building there that we knew, and his sister used to live just down the road from us. So we approached him. He had a bit of a sort of small custom build, not custom build, but it was sort of like a small volume build setup where he had his office. He had a couple of goes at a draftsperson, and we went and had a meeting, and both my wife and I thought, well, we don't really have a design. So and then from there we decided, okay, let's look for a designer. And we someone that friends had used and that sort of thing, that was based in Albany. We had a meeting, and we just ended up going down that design track. And he designs well for orientation and solar, solar design and that sort of thing. So we had a meeting, and that started there. And as far as Undercover Architect, well, I suppose I remember my wife saying, well, come on, Michael, you've got to get onto Pinterest and stuff. I sort of left that to her, and then this is probably 2021, probably February, something like that. And then I just started looking around, and I just remember just clicking on a ColourBond ColourBond link, and up came Undercover Architect. And so then I sort of got engaged and just started to follow a bit. And then I just thought, well, what's the value in this? And then over time I thought, well, yes, there's definitely plenty of value after listening to podcasts and that sort of thing, that you built the first 10 podcasts are amazing, just on how to get started, the value of orientation and where to put your rooms and different things like that. So that made me think, well, maybe I'll look further into that. So that's where it started.
Fantastic. And you joined in 2021, and I think it's been really interesting because I see this for Home Method members, is that kind of jumping in at the beginning and then taking the opportunity to slow down a bit and actually, learn, and then start to apply that learning to what you're doing in terms of the design approach, and then thinking about how you're going to build as well. When you started out, you mentioned obviously meeting with that designer, and you started out thinking about the design. What was your vision for what you wanted to create in terms of the type of home that you wanted to build, and how it was going to create the kind of lifestyle that you wanted to lead there? Because obviously you've got the farming property, and then this, this being a 2.5 acre lot that you're thinking about for your own retirement. How are you envisaging that house needed to support you in your lifestyle?
Well, we wanted to be able to have family to stay, and so just to fit the lifestyle, something that was sort of simple to manage. We had the conversation. I mean, I'd looked at some split level type homes that might have had the bedroom wings on one level and the living areas on another, and just to have less impact on the fall on our site and that sort of thing. But my wife said, we want to get level ground, easy access, so we can age in homes. So that became something that we built into it early on. So we've made all, having 920 doors and access has sort of been built in from the start. So, and then it was just we had some ideas, but I think the designer helped us evolve. We've ended up with a pavilion style house. We probably weren't thinking of that at the start, but it sort of evolved that way. And that's the value, I suppose, of getting a designer in to bring their knowledge and professionalism into that side of it that you can only see within the box, and they look without outside the box and analyze your brief and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's pretty much where that started. And yeah, I think we thought, oh well, we'll take that to a certain point, and then we'll get a draftsperson, and then we'll get it all drawn up. But that design phase ended up going for a long time. But I think 12 months basically we had pretty much the base of what we've ended up. Just some tweaks since then, really.
Yeah, and it's a great plan in terms of having that sort of entry through the middle. You've got the living, kitchen, dining, the services areas, the garage on one side, and then you've got the sleeping zone on the other side with your own main bedroom, obviously making the most of the view with then those secondary bedrooms behind. And what I love about the floor plan is you have thought obviously about where you and your wife are going to be using the spaces the most, and really invested in that being a fantastic opportunity for you to have a great lifestyle without obviously oversizing the spaces. But there's still the capacity for them to expand to support when you do have family come to stay. And I can see that it's going to work incredibly well for you both when it's just the two of you, and then obviously when you've got family staying with you. So it's ended up being a really great design. I know that you and I obviously had a chat through the process a couple of times in terms of those reviews. How did you see that? Why did you, I suppose, seek that out in terms of getting that second opinion, and how you were seeing that design coming together through that process to get that input as you went along the way with your designer?
Yeah, it's interesting because you bring a designer along, and then you go. We had a lot of different designs that I think we challenged the designer on. That's not going to fit our brief and how we're going to live on the site. So we sort of worked through that, and then we got to a certain point, and it's interesting. You always get conversation from outside. People want to help with ideas, and my brother-in-law, he had managed a housing business in Western Australia and a windows business, and we got to a point that we thought, okay, let's challenge this. So we actually got he had imported some designers from outside for their business from Singapore, and we actually engaged one of he got onto them, and we said, okay, this is our brief. Can you come up with something on this site? And it was, it kept going back to a bit more like a volume build type, where there's boxes here, there, and everywhere, and it didn't have the flow that we had in our design. And so it just showed the value of, that the designer was on the right track with the design to suit our brief, because we wanted to have a nice open plan living area, and we wanted separation between the living zones, and then we also wanted to be able to have separation if we had guests, that they could have a little bit of privacy and that sort of thing. So I think that all got built in well. The limiting factor, I suppose, was around having a nice outdoor entertaining space with without blocking the solar access, so losing the value of that into the home. So we had a few different ideas around that, because we've got a sort of central courtyard that faces north. And so, yeah, there's just a few little things around that challenged us for a while. And I know we talked about that on our, one-on-one too, just ideas about that. So, yeah, so it just built from that. We did, my wife said, oh, come and have a look at this house. A friend of mine's, I like their home, and it turned out, and you just had to walk in the door, and it felt like a quality home, and thermally, just well built, and yeah, a home that didn't need a lot of heating and cooling, and yeah, it was, so we had a meeting with the builder on site, and he pointed out a few mistakes that had been made next door, and said, well, we won't do this. And so we haven't done the pack process, but I had a number of conversations with the builder. I just say, well, here's the designs, what do you think? And it's quite interesting with our your design review. You know, you were suggesting, okay, we've got a 30-degree pitch. We could bring that down to 25 degrees, and you know, we could drop the walls from 2.7 down to 2.55, and that might save a bit of cash and losing a little bit of glazing. And you know, it's pretty much the same suggestions that the builder was making. But now we've got the trusses up and walked around with my wife, and you know, I've been open to a few of those changes, but the designer definitely not. He wanted to hang on to his design ideas, but you know, sort of glad that we've stayed with that. And yeah, so there's just little things like that. I mean, yeah, that are happening. So that was just that design phase that progressed through time anyway.
And that's the thing that I found really fantastic about how you have approached this process, Michael, because lots of people do get very nervous and scared about seeking alternative input from other professionals throughout their process. And I know that obviously you've been navigating your budget and the demands of your budget and making decisions about whether to extend it with that value proposition of what are you going to get for it at the other end of it. And then at the same time, you've obviously been bringing that team input together and investigating that professional help at various points along the way in a way that's actually been really great to watch. And as I said, I think a lot of people get very nervous about doing that. They feel like they're going to be disloyal or disrespectful or something like that to the professionals that they're working with, when if those professionals aren't necessarily, I suppose, if they tend to then miss out on the opportunities that might come from some of that extra kind of collaborative input. And so I know that team's been a really big part of your journey generally, and you've done some really great work in terms of thinking about who to bring in and when. And I think the two areas I'd really love to dive into with you are, you obviously wanted to be creating an energy efficient, thermally comfortable home. That was always a really key kind of priority of yours in terms of how this design was going to work and create the kind of home that you wanted. And then you were also weighing up the volume builder versus the custom builder approach and seeing what was going to deliver the best outcome from a budget and I suppose, a building methodology and a result for you. And you didn't just kind of do it at a surface level. You really did dive into the details of it to investigate and weigh up the benefits and the pros and cons of both options. So I'm wondering if we can first chat about the energy efficiency process and how you kind of went about that. Obviously, inside Home Method, we talk about bringing that energy efficiency assessment in early and using it as a design tool to be able to get real data on the design decisions that you're making. How did you're navigating your design process, you're getting that kind of additional input. How did you start thinking about getting those assessments done and what they were telling you about your project and what you needed to change or correct or improve on in terms of how you were going about the design?
Yeah, well, certainly, I guess as far as bringing in consultants and that sort of thing, so we just went with the designer. So, okay, need a site survey done. So we got that done first. We got the power rating done. And I'm trying to think what else. I think we saw tests. We just sort of got all those things out of the way early. And then that helped the designer with, how to deal with the site. And as we worked further on, and then we, I'm trying to think, it was not long after you and Sid sort of did your podcast, and that I thought, well, there's value here. I'll just reach out to Sid, and he said, "Yep, no worries. Might be a little bit of a wait, but that was fine. We had time." So well, we've had a lot of toing and froing of ideas, windows, areas, whether there's fans. It's been because in WA we haven't met NCC 2022 yet. I think it's May 25. So. There's not the requirement to go to the 7 stars, but at that time, I think we were just under 6 stars, and we had a few issues with our workshop. So that there's a different requirement for height limit for the roof on your workshop. So that then became an activity space, and then it would get through the DA requirements, but that meant having it also to come into the energy rating. So then that, so Sid was great just dealing with that, how much do we have to do, because it had to meet minimal habitable requirements. And then, there's volume, and there's a lot of things that go into it. But, just working it through and looking at options and what level of glazing do you require. I mean, we were always going to go with double glazing, but, low-air glass and insulation, I think the designer pretty much nailed that pretty much from the start. And then, slab edge, we wanted to have a timber floor, so we didn't have benefits of thermal mass. So, it's a matter of, so we got slab on ground, but, timber on top. So, it's just dealing with all of those. Because we've got a nice site, then we've got our designer. All his homes have a lot of glazing, and but that makes, that's what we wanted. And so we had to work with that, less glazing. I think there's a ratio, whatever it is, 20, 25, 30, 20 something to 1 or something that, once you go over that, it gets hard. Once you get under that. So we just worked through that, and just, the value of Sid just running that through his rating system and just doing those changes was extremely valuable.
Yeah. And in terms of, obviously, generally when you do have a suspended floor, you get penalised in the energy efficiency assessment. So how did you combat that in terms of that, plus obviously the glazing? Like, do you remember as you were working through decisions that you had to make about perhaps upgrading the insulation, or like you say, that edge insulation? How were you balancing that out? And then also, how were you balancing that out mentally from a budget point of view? Because obviously, as you said, WA doesn't have the increased requirement, but you had a priority that you wanted to have an energy efficient outcome. So what was sort of the internal dialogue going on at the same time of those decisions that you were making?
I think glazing was something that I guess we would have dealt with, and we have actually a couple of bedrooms. We just, in the just before the framing was going out, everything was marked out on the pad. We just said, oh no, we don't need that quite as big of windows there. So, there's different ways of changing that. We've pulled some doors out, we've done some minor things, but we haven't really played around with the main north-facing glazing. So it's really just tweaking around, little things like fans, and one thing that was important was getting ventilation right and that sort of thing, so you can open the building up, when it's warm, or just to ventilate. But as far as that iteration, we just really went with Sid's advice. Look, these are areas you get this sort of value, and we just sort of worked through that. And there's things like, floor, a darker floor will give you this. Basically, we're at climate zone 6. It's a fairly temperate climate. It's sort of, we don't get frosts and don't really get too many, but you get the odd. I mean, there's 45 degrees in Albany about 3 weeks ago, but that's pretty rare. But so it's a mild climate, so you don't have to deal with the really high extremes. I think slab edge gave us 0.2, I think, on our energy rating. So that, slab edge came in, and we don't have under slab insulation. So there's just those few little minor tweaks. And I think the big thing that dropped the energy rating was when we bought the workshop in. And I think as time went on, that was able to be rated. The house was still able to be rated on its own, because I think we dropped 0.5 of a unit on energy rating just through volume. So I think it really does. I mean, our house has grown from where we started. I mean, we started thinking $2,500 a square metre, and but it's grown to allow certain things that we wanted in our design and our floor plan. So I think we're about 270 square metres, whereas I know that you drive, low 200s or something too. But so that's an area that we've got a reasonable sized garage because we have, being farmers, we've got, larger vehicles, so we accommodate for that, and also accommodating for storage. But that's about it on that. I can't remember any specific things. It's just little tweaks around the rating.
Yeah. And can you explain why the workshop was having a detrimental impact on your energy efficiency rating in terms of how that was playing out?
Well, it's really just the volume, I think, because it added, I'm trying to think, it's about 120 square meters, I think. It's just that extra volume. And then, we're only going to insulate. We had to put a minimum amount of glazing in. So we've got some north face glazing and we'll use, so we'll use minimal insulation, that sort of thing in it. So it probably detracted because it wasn't meeting the same standards. It might have been sitting at 5 stars, and the houses would have been sitting at 6.5 stars. So one sort of drew from the other. So I think interpretation of the regulations around that has helped us, keep the house where it should be. And that, we basically redesigned the whole workshop. So the designer had designed, so everything was on a 7.5 metre width, so two pavilions, 7.5 metres wide with 30-degree pitch gable roof, and then the workshop was the same. So, and then it was going to be clad similar to the house. So so then we basically put a flat, a skillion roof on it to get underneath the, I think 4.5 metres might have been the height we're allowed to build a workshop, and it's about 6.5 metres for the home. So I think our roof pitch is about 5.5 metres on the house. And we just went with that with the workshop design. But my wife and I, we just couldn't really, we just didn't like the skillion roof design, and we eventually said to the designer, look, just put it back in and we'll just deal with it, because I think it added 40 grand to the build, basically trying to make
make it a gable instead of a skillion.
So so it became an activity space, so that got it through the DA rather than a workshop. So but we see advantages. So down the track, we put some plumbing in the workshop floor and that sort of thing. So, we can put a self-contained unit out there down the track. So there's advantages of having extra glazing and building the walls so that you line them, like we'll just put a custom old lining inside, and just do that as minimal, and then we can, change that down the track if it's required.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance, isn't it, when you're trying to obviously create an aesthetic outcome and also a functional outcome, and then that triggers particular requirements in terms of how it's considered from a building code point of view, and then that has a consequential impact then on things like the energy efficiency assessment, and you're having to make decisions every step of the way of, is this worth the spend to us to determine the value proposition of it. So I think you did a really great job in terms of navigating that for yourself and thinking about what was going to be then the best decision to make in terms of, like, the decision that you've made to put plumbing in the floor and think about the future functionality of it and how it could be converted down the track. So I think you've created a really good outcome in that regard. The thing for me that has been really interesting to watch is that weighing up of the choices. And, before we jumped on, you talked about the glazing and using thermally broken frames and making calls about the brand that you were using and how that was going to work in terms of the energy efficiency and what you could get supply of in terms of the star rating. Can you talk through, because obviously making the decision to have double glazing that's thermally broken comes with a cost impost. So can you talk through that decision making in terms of thinking about your supplier, what was locally available, what was going to work from a star rating point of view, and how you went about specifying that and thinking about it?
Yeah, so we sort of had residential range windows, and our north facing. So we've got a 6-metre opening that had large glass sliding doors, sort of 4-panel. So there's 2 panels, so 2 fixed panels, and then we had another section that had panels there. So, and our bedroom also had a double opening, so a single panel. So I think it was 3.5 meters. So we sort of talked to the glazier about initially early on when we got a quantities surveyor to value what cost the build, and then we did. I think this happens a lot. You sort of go back and think, oh, where can we find some savings? So we made a few tweaks. We talked to the glazier, and he said, well, 2.2 meter doors, if you bring them back, to either 2 meter panels or, just getting back to more standard and custom sizes. So we did a bit of that. And the sliding doors were, the higher range, so good quality range, but none of them were thermally broken. Australian window systems, I think, coming up with the NCC 2022 to meet higher energy ratings, brought out a sort of in-between range. They called them Comfort Edge, that basically used the timber in the sill instead of having the aluminium exposed. The aluminium was protected by timber, and they were able to get that. I'm not sure what you call it, registered, whatever. Anyway, to get that specified, so you could build and get that energy rating on it. And our designer put those Comfort Edge in at least 18 months ago, but those windows weren't even available in WA at the time. I just sort of started to talk to the glazier, and I think about that time we'd done the quantity surveying, and the costing was way above our expectations. So I remember Sid and our designer just saying, whoa, this is way above where we've been at, because we were just in the middle of that COVID escalation where there's supply issues and that sort of thing. So we thought, righto, we'll go and get a couple of custom builders to quote on it. And, they were nearly half. And so a lot of the glazing and that sort of thing. So the conversation, one of the custom builders was local. I think they built 50 houses a year. So we went and had the conversation with them, and then talked to the glazier, who was the AWS supplier in Albany. And yeah, we just sort of worked through that. And he said, well, I don't even have the tooling for it. The material's not worth it. So we just said to the designer, look, can we just go back to what we had? And yeah, talk to the volume builder, and, they would have had to get their head around it. Would have cost us a lot more because of change of methods of installing and that sort of thing. So yeah, we went through that period, but and then yeah, the custom builder that we ended up going with, he uses a different window supplier than the designer puts in. So then once we got through, we sort of kept working with the custom builder for we sort of left it live, I suppose. We made some design changes. So I guess it was early 2022 when we would have got the quantity surveyors. Yeah, it would have been January, February 2022, and we sort of went back and sort of reassessed and looked at our design, made some changes, and it was pretty much getting towards the end of 2022 when we really made a few changes with a bit of design and just basic small stuff, updated it with the designer, went back. So we just basically followed up with one of the volume builders. It was a local volume builder, and used a lot of local trades and that sort of thing. And yeah, it was a matter of just working through, saying this is our selections. This is, just trying to get them to quote to what the way we wanted it built, which was an interesting process, because we went backwards and forwards a number of times, and they always sit down there and with the quote in front and say, well, why is this, like they go back to their own insulation, they go back, to their wall wraps, and, like a lot of those sorts of things. So that was yeah, it was an interesting time just going through that process. In some places, you just got to have trust, but you've got to know the person and know their background. And we know that he's, I remember him saying to us, I'm going to retire in 6 or 7 years. He said, the last thing I want to do is to be called up when I'm retired to say, come and fix this. So, that means something to us.